Okay. So, hello again, everyone. We are delighted to have with us today Dr. Amit Sheniak, which is a research fellow of our center and which divides his time between research, teaching, and consulting in the Ministry of Justice. After completing
Of Defense, Ministry of Defense.
Apologies. I expropriated you to our side. After finishing his PhD, he conducted he conducted a postdoc in Harvard Law in Kennedy School in Harvard, and then he came back to Israel. He's now collaborating with us in several platforms, most notably currently in a growing and ever strengthening relationship with the Danish embassy. But today we will talk about Iran.
All
So
right,
thank you very much, Amit, and we are all ears.
That's great. So thank you. And let me, okay, you can make sure you see my presentation, even though it's not. All right. Just making sure I'm on the first slide. Okay. So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me again. Since I came back from that, my first postdoc at Harvard, one of the main anchors that I have still going from that day to today, I would say, is being part of this great research center. Although I always feel I'm the representative, which is not a lawyer. I'm like the only non-lawyer among the lawyers. But I'm the one, I guess, also taking care of an angle which is more, I guess, policy-oriented, I guess, political science-oriented. And I'm saying this today also because specifically in this specific presentation, from a lot of the work that I do, this is one of which is much more, I would guess, policy / politically, historically related, and I will talk about that in a minute. So my presentation will be about research about Iran, but I can't hear myself, so somebody have to. All right. So it will be about Iran, but I thought of starting to speak about the cyber conflict in the Middle East research group, which was a research group founded by the Truman Institute, the Davis Institute, and of course also the Cybersecurity Research Center. Also, we had a generous grant also we got from the Polonsky Foundation. And I wanted to speak a bit about that. And one of the outcome of this research group was the research I will present today. But I think that talking about this is important because in a way, it shows the reason why to try and explore countries which is less explored in the world in regard to their cyber policy. Now, the big thing about the Middle East is that if you analyze the events that you see here and many other events, you'll see that there's a cyber component which is attached to almost every famous or known political, violent, interstate or interstate conflict. And this should not surprise us because research such as the one conducted by Valeriano and Manis have yielded the outcome which should be expected, shouldn't surprise us, which is that there's an overlap between where you have physical conflicts, physical dispute or real dispute in the non-virtual world, and also dispute and conflict in the virtual world, and the Middle East being not a very and so calm area, an area that encompasses a lot of the conflicts of the world, hence has a lot of cyber conflict. But even though that's true, it seems that there's hardly any, there's hardly any research that was done about that, okay? So only in recent years, you'll see a research that is emanating to address the Middle East. And this should not let us to the understanding that there's no reports or policy written about the Middle East and cyber, because it seems that it's all over. And I will talk about that. It seems that states writing their own strategy are talking about the Middle East and cyber all the time. But there's a big research gap here. And this research gap was at the heart of why we decided to establish a research group that will try to narrow a bit, modestly try to narrow that gap. And the gap is that there's only a few studies that are original, which address the cyber in general and specifically the Middle East. There's also a lack of understanding among people that study the Middle East. They don't study cyber, about the importance of cyber and how it affects the Middle East, how it affects the Middle Eastern countries' policies, how they conduct themselves, how do they keep their stability, how do they forge laws, etc., etc. And there's also a low understanding of the effect of strategy and national security of the Middle East on how we think about cyber. And a lot happens in the Middle East, so there's a dual thing here. The methodology that we decided to follow then, trying to, I would say, close this gap a bit, was to try to do a cyber-related research which will address issues in the Middle East written in Middle Eastern languages. So we thought that one of the main reasons behind this gap is that most of the researchers in the Western world, hence they speak English, hardly any of them speak local Middle Eastern language. Those who speak Middle Eastern languages, hardly any of them study cybersecurity. So we have Middle Eastern experts, they don't address cyber. And we have cyber experts, they talk about the Middle East, they talk about Iran, but they don't study Iran in Farsi in regard to cyber. And maybe they're missing out of something here. And that's why we established our group, which was about that. It was about trying to address this big question of what is the impact of cyber conflicts, practices, and related technology on the forging of national security and policy and doctrine in the Middle East. Connecting this world of cybersecurity, Middle Eastern studies, and international relations. And you will see, so the researchers that are part of the group and also the researchers that collaborated with me studying Iran, and we'll talk about it in a minute, were from those different kind of doctrines, okay, and disciplines. Okay, so we have a few meetings along the last 3-4 years, concluding in a research workshop in which we had the pleasure to invite one of the only leading scholars that are studying Middle Eastern cyber, which is James Shire, which sits here, and we had the pleasure to host him. And he came over because he thought it was interesting. Now, we divided ourselves in this group to subgroups who studied different angles, different issues of cybersecurity in the Middle East, right? State and sub-state actors, regional dynamics, threat perceptions and discourse, and that's what I chose to address with my colleagues when we decided to address Iran. So the primary goal was to narrow the gap. The group did its entire research not in a quantity but in a qualitative methodology, mapping the regional landscape, trying to address Middle Eastern discourse by being able to overcome this obstacle of local languages. So we had Arabic experts, Farsi, Turkish, etc. And the main goal was to start by doing research. We all, kind of like a beginner academics, so we need to publish, but also forming as an outcome a database, which will have translated information of formal information or needed or important information written in local languages, translated into English, a database that can be used later on, continuing the study of Middle East and cyber and how they interact. And we're in the middle of that. We already concluded some of the research, and we concluded the work of the workshop. And now we're going to, maybe in the next few years, we'll move on to expand the database and actually to make it accessible to other researchers. All right. So this was a very long introduction to this research, which is at the heart of our talk, which is about Iran. I did it together with two colleagues. One is Yossi Manshurf. He's a Middle Eastern expert, which is an expert in Iran. He speaks Farsi from the Haifa University. And my colleague from the Hebrew University from the IR department, Daniel Sobelman, who is also fluent in Arabic, but also he's an expert in international relations in the Middle East. And myself, as somebody who try to study the connection between international relations, policy, and cyber. And so what I'll start by talking about a few of this context and basic assumption about how we see Iran and cyber. There's this international sort of like perception. And then a bit about methodology and theory and how we try to unpack this perception and what we found out when we actually had access to a lot of Farsi written information produced by the Iranian regime. And we have a whole different picture of a much more deeper understanding of how we see Iran as a cyber player. And of course, at the end, I'll try to talk about conclusions which are more than going further than Iran, thinking about other states or other non-democratic states and how they conduct themselves in the cyber domain. All right, so the context is that Iran is one of the world's cyber malign actors. This is one of the, if you log into one of the existing cyber conflict maps, Iran is at the heart of it. There's a big flag of Iran there. There's a lot of action going on. And if you read of states' formal strategies, United States, also other states, they talk about, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. It's there all the time. James Clapper, which was director of the National Intelligence of the United States, said in his famous brief in 2012, Iran's cyber ability is dramatically increasing in recent years in depth and complexity. Others said that Tehran continues to leverage cyber espionage, propaganda, and attacks to support its security priorities. Everybody talks about Iran. Everybody is basing their knowledge, they're saying about Iran, mostly due to the intelligence knowledge that they have or knowledge of cyber attacks. For Israelis, that's not news. That there's in the news, also in the world news, but also in the local news, regional news, people talk about the cyber conflict between Israel and Iran as an extension of the dynamic or the competition for regional dominance. You see it all the time. Different attacks of different kinds, from watershed events like Stuxnet against, allegedly done by Israel and the United States against the Iranian nuclear facilities, to other attacks in civil infrastructure, but also just, social media and other stuff. Vice versa in both sides. It seems that the common story about Iran is like that. People think that Iran is a story of a country who was surprised by a cyber attack conducted against its nuclear facilities more than a decade and a half ago, 2008, 2010, Stuxnet. And after it revealed it, this is a story of overcoming that failure by acknowledging that this is a threat. There's a threat to its critical infrastructure from other countries. And in about a decade, from a totally surprised country who did not foresee this, threat, to a country that is now very proficient in cyber, that conducts cyber operation, that is a known cyber actor in the world, and that appears in most of the Western, intelligence or cyber strategy is known as a main propagator of cyber attacks. We identified in this, research narrative, a few major gaps, which we try to tackle or address by exploring stuff that is written actually in Farsi. There's an overemphasize of the centrality of the Stuxnet attack, as if this is the watershed event also for Iran, not just for the world. There's a lot of relying on the recent reports of Iran's cyber actions in the Middle East. So every week, when there's a new report about an attack, in which is usually published by cyber companies, then we have new written about Iran and Iran's cyber abilities, and everybody thinks that they address the recent news, and they don't go much further or much more backwards or historically than that. So most researchers, both of governments and academics, disregard Iran's interstate surveillance and content control policies. So detaching whatever Iran is allegedly doing to the world by using cyber tools and what it is doing internally using cyber tools, how they track, how they monitor their own citizens and stuff like that. So there is a question that I tried to address was, what's Iran regime perspective on cybersecurity? And our hypothesis was what? That we think that Iran has a much more complex and evolving perception of what cyber is, and hence its policy, its laws have evolved and have changed. And only lately, they have shifted from thinking about cyber as an inner threat to thinking about cyber as an external threat from states like Israel, the United States. So the other way around. Well, theoretically, and I think this is not, I guess, less of the place to talk about that, but we encompass a lot of theory was already written about the connection between science, technology, and society studies and critical security studies and cyber. One of the maybe one of the aspects in which it's down there in the draft of our article. But I guess one of the things that could be talked about is the securitization theory, which deals with how new technologies are suddenly being perceived as part of security, as part of the military. And what's important about the securitization theory, under what is called as the Copenhagen School in International Relations, is that they emphasize the speech act, the way it's being talked about by officials or in the laws or in the policy, the discourse, they emphasize the discourse has given us the clues of when is that tipping point happens. When suddenly computers, not just computers, suddenly it's cyber, suddenly it's part of external threat, internal threat. Okay, so securitization process, which is emphasized mainly on discourse, and hence it fits really well with the methodology of studying local written texts of various kinds. All right. So our methodology was to try to study then Iran cyber in their own words. We studied Iran's strategic community, and there is a strategic community in Iran which writes and talk about Iran's strategy in social media, in other media outlets. There's a lot, and I'll show you in a minute. We studied the regime sponsors media as an official, outlet of how they think about issues, also about cyber. We employed a neo-institutional research, meaning that we focus on how we see this discourse as impacting or describing the creation of new institutions. And those institutions are not just an institution, but as a symbol that address bigger issues, okay? Process tracing analysis and etc. So the Iranian strategic cyber community, there is a community like that, which is very interesting. There's official websites. There are the Iran IRGC, their National Guards media, which address different issues. We have Iranian analysts and media outlets, which, of course, not the kind that is opposing the regime, but the kind that talk very interestingly about Iran's actions and how they deal with their own threats and how they see things. So there was a lot of material to touch. Actually, it was almost too easy to access that, and we're just on the tip of covering much more information that is out there and can be explored, should be explored. This is the result of our research, okay? I try to put it in a table, and to move along the table, and then we'll go deeply into highlight some of the examples that I will describe. So we try to see it as a matrix in which there's an evolution of how state, specifically here Iran, perceive cyber as a threat. There is some influences, okay? So there's some events that happens in the world. There's a change in the threat perception. How do we see cyber as part of what kind of threat? There is a policy creation which develops and change along the time. We build institutions to execute this policy, and maybe we can also attach this into some of the thoughts about the operations that are known or attributed to Iran as a country that have done it. Now, the first phase, as you can see, and this is there publicly, started much earlier before Stuxnet. So 2003, or the beginning of the millennium, Iran was already, according to their own, to their own materials from that time, thinking about cyber as a main issue, which they extract, fearing from the United States actions that were done in the Second Gulf War. So even though the United States was involved in Iraq, Iran was observing very carefully. And immediately they concluded that cyber will be a main issue. And hence, they should develop a policy of cyber defense. And they did also establish a new and very famous institution that exists until today, it's called the Passive Defense Organization, which is in charge of many issues, also cyber. So this is very important, because immediately when you read things in Farsi, you get it. They don't think about Stuxnet as the main watershed events that caused them to think about cyber. So the country of Iran didn't start to address cyber only due to the fact that it thought that there's an external threat conducted by an attacked state from Israel, the United States, but there's a much greater threat, an inner threat, the possibility of a world power, the United States, meddling with Iran infrastructure by using cyber means. That's a different story. So this is one of this external threat stability perception, which started in the millennium, really showed itself in the creation of this passive defense organization. This organization is responsible for defending national infrastructure in general, also cyber. Okay, and you see a lot of quotes about that. One of them, interestingly enough, is about that. This is a headquarters which is responsible for the protection of the country's cyber borders in the civilian sphere. And I think this is very interesting, that already in the beginning of the millennium, Iran, like other states also, were thinking that cyber is an extension of its sovereign borders, its sovereign territorial borders. And hence, that even though there wasn't a direct threat by the United States or any other country, they should guard those borders, and hence establish the right institution like this passive defense organization, which still exists. It's subordinated to Iran's general headquarters, which manage both the Iranian National Guard and the Iranian military. Now, the second phase, which you could see that started in 2008, again, not related to Stuxnet, not related to an external threat, but an internal threat, that did not stop since then, was a whole different perception, in which, due to the so-called Green Revolution, and then later on also other internal protests, also the one that we are seeing today, infusing a different kind of threat perception in regards to cyber in Iran, which is about the fear of social media as enhancing and as affecting regime stability. And hence, you need to develop a whole different policy which sees cyber as an internal threat, to internally being able to monitor the internet and to filter internet communication. And there's a lot of institutions that were established to do that. One of them, the first one, was the Cyber Crime Center, established in 2009, which is attached to Iran's pre-existing internal militia, which is under the National Guard, that is in charge of keeping the order, making sure that people don't criticize the regime, the Basij. This is, as they say, and I'm quoting, "Today, the style of wars have changed, and the main goal of the enemy is no longer to encounter the country, but to conquer the country, but to change the regime in the countries. And the intention of the whole society should be drawn to this." This understanding, by the way, this cybercrime center, as you can see, was put in the wanted list, some of the other actors of the FBI, and it's a known entity that conducts cyber operations. But talking about enemy here, Iranians do not address a specific enemy or an external threat, but the general threat or the general enemy of the West, or Western influence on internal stability. Other regimes were the cyber police that was established, in which you can see the nomination of very leading Iranian generals in the military to lead the police, and also a great rise in the in the resources that were allocated to this specific entity, which still exists until today. Last but not least, but very interesting, is Iran's attempt to create an ability to shut down the internet in case of internal stability. There's these whole thoughts of establishing what they call the NIN, which is a separate internet, a separate internal internet channel that allows a better control of the regime to filter content, but also to shut down the internet in case of internal instability. We have seen this happening along the years also today, although in recent events of the hijab protest in Iran, and they have spent a lot of money on that. What's interesting enough, and look to this quotation, this is also part of how Iran sees itself working together with other non-democratic regimes like China, that has a lot of knowledge of how to control internal internet communication. As they say here, Tehran and Beijing will work together to create a national internet for Iran as part of a 25 years partnership agreement that they are discussing. So part of the reason this became an issue of connecting between different countries in the world that see cyber as an internal threat and are creating knowledge and of know-how of how to develop technological abilities to control internal threats that emanates from the access of civilians to information around the world. All right, the next stage is the known Stuxnet attack that everybody speaks about. What's interesting for me is that this is not the beginning of the evolution of cyber of perception in Iran, but the third or the second or the third step only. The Stuxnet attack, attacking Iran's nuclear facilities, did not surprise Iran by the fact that their infrastructure are vulnerable to cyber attacks, because this was already part of their policy in the beginning of the millennium. What surprised them was that this now became an extension of their rivalry with other states in the region. So specifically Israel and Iran, and this competition for regional dominance and for to be, the Iranian nuclear aspiration as part of this. The big things that have happened here was the creation of the Supreme Council for Cyberspace. There's a Supreme Council for Cyberspace in Iran that has all the leading figures of both the political and the security arena in Iran, and also have made Iran very good in not just defending, but also conducting similar attacks on other infrastructure of other states, like the Aramco attack against the Saudis' oil facilities, and you can also attach this maybe to the attack on Israel's water infrastructure. All right, so the specific institution, the Supreme Council for Cyberspace, was established specifically by Khamenei, by the supreme leader of Iran, just to emphasize how important they have seen this event. This is when suddenly you see how there's a connection, an overlap that we expected in the beginning between regional aspiration of Iran and cyber. But this is only more than a decade after they've started working on cyber and forging the cyber policy. As they say, today the era of hard war has ended, and we are facing soft war and semi-hard war, one of the pillars of which is the cyberspace. Last but not least is the latest part of Iran taking all this knowledge and within the cyber abilities into their security regime, their ability to project power in the Middle East, their ability to put cyber as part of this cyber force buildup, and to think of cyber not just as a threat, but also as an opportunity in a way to cultivate their own interests, whether that is to cultivate their own proxies in the Middle East or to attack whoever is not should be attacked with anything else. And maybe the most important institution there is the cyber the new cyber and new threat headquarters, which is under Iran's National Guard, which is their long arm that works in the region. And this is when you actually really see cyber as part of, like they acknowledge the fact that cyber is part of the Israeli-Iranian conflict. All right. And as they say, one of the biggest threats in the world today is a cyber threat. We must increase our deterrence in this area. So this is the first time in which they go proactive. And suddenly we see Iran thinking about cyber not just as a threat, but as a mean to enhance deterrence, as a mean to project power or to create a balance of power in the world. All right, to sum up, hopefully I'm in time. I think I am. The interesting part in this research is that you see a dynamic here. Now, all of us here listening, most of us here listening, we're all experts in this field. We know that there's a dynamic of cyber policy, cyber threats in the world, but it seems that there is hardly any research that try to employ this understanding to deeply study non-democratic, I would say, non-Western countries, countries like Iran. We see that in the study, much more in the study of Russia and cyber, China and cyber, but hardly in the other states like in the Middle East, and specifically Iran, which is considered to be such an important maligned player in the cyber domain. You see that the dynamic here is very diverse, but getting this complexity helps us, I think, understand the diversity of what Iran thinks about cyber and how they do cyber. And that is also holds some of the reasons why, for example, Iran is very good at employing influence operation in regard to cyber, and they do it because they have a lot of knowledge of managing their own internal social media using different cyber tools. It makes them very good, and that's what they do also externally. So a lot of the explanations, or better explanation of understanding Iran and cyber, are in this much more complex development of policy and threat perception, which can be seen here in this table. All right, to sum up, so in terms of methodology, the fact that you can go beyond that gap of local languages really gives you access to a local narrative. And a local narrative is a gold mine of understanding states. As Israelis and studying cyber in Hebrew, we know the difference of thinking about Israel when you read things in Hebrew and when you just analyze what is attributed, the cyber operation that is attributed to us. And there's a Western bias here, okay? There's a Western research also, I guess myself included, we think about the world in Western eyes, but when you study other examples like Iran, non-democratic, non-Western, the picture is different. The evolution of cyber threat and cyber policy might be different. Theoretically, I think this is attached to a growing writing about the study of authoritative cyber policy dynamics, so digital authoritativeness. There is thing to be said about some parallel lines between Iran and China, Iran and other countries, how they conduct cyber, how it affects their own policy, and how it yields laws, regulations, force build-up, institution building, and stuff like that. It seems that also that Iran really think of cyber as a main pillar that affects its own evolution, internal evolution of doctrine and security policy. All right, so I would also say that if that's a slide I'm missing, but I would say usually thinking about Iran, we translate Iran to the known APTs, the known advanced persistent threat, APT 39, APT 38, etc. So we have all these nicknames of cyber professionals, in which means that we have clues to identify if somebody was attacked, if an entity was attacked by Iran. Technically analyzing them, we understand that it might be attributed to Iran. But the aim of this research was to go beyond this APT map and to try to delve into the internal evolution. And maybe by studying Iran and other countries like that, we get the Middle East better. We also get non-democratic cyber policies better. Yeah. So I will conclude with this just to say that even in 1979, Khomeini talked about the importance of media, and you can see a flow of this understanding also to the nowadays ideas of cyber in a non-democratic Islamic country like Iran. So thank you, and I'd love to get comments. I would also say that we presented this paper for a workshop in which Tal participated in, and it's going to be presented in a much. We're just working on a new draft. That's why I couldn't send it, because it's really in the making, which will be we'll present it in the international in ISA, International Studies Association, in March at Toronto this year, and hopefully this will be published soon. It seems that there's a lot of hunger for this kind of stuff, which touch cyber in places that are not usually explored. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amit. This is very interesting. If it's okay, I will kick off the discussion with a few questions. First and foremost, do you think that there is relevance to look at Iran's involvement in other areas, be that in the Middle East, say Syria, or also outside of it, say Ukraine? Because it seems that the majority of the study and conclusion looks at the perception of Iran of threats either from outside or from inside, but it is an inward looking project. So maybe the actions outward by the state might have some might add some interest. Secondly, what about the decision of Iran to participate in international processes like the GGE and Open-Ended Working Group, and actually to translate its opinion to the world? Maybe part of the future research needs to compare between what Iran is saying on the domestic level and what it is saying on the outside level. I think that there will be more coherence than we expect. Thirdly, and you alluded to this a bit in the conclusion, what about the historical and cultural context on a broader level? So it is very interesting to see the chronology of development of the perception of Iran, and I think you should start sooner. You should start from 1979 rather than end with it. I think it will be very interesting to see how some of the current concerns are echoed in previous situations, and I think that since we are a Western group which is looking at the non-Western approach, it is our duty to show that there is coherence. In places where we see something as irrational, if we will be able to find coherence, it will be better translated to crowd such as ourselves. And I think, again, it will tell a broader story, and an article can become a book. And I think it should become, because you have many interesting insights and you can develop it to many different aspects or spheres. So I will stop here, but many interesting questions and thoughts. Thank you.
So you want me to start by, well, maybe I'll start by answering you because there's so many. And so first of all, thank you so much. It's great questions. I think there's so many questions, good questions. It means that it stirs some ideas and thoughts. It doesn't go, it's not banal. And that's the aim, I guess. Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you said. But so of course, this is just an article. And as you guys probably know, to crack down the ability to publish articles, you got to narrow yourself down so much. This is definitely a project should be covered in the books, maybe even. But limiting ourselves, then we have to limit some of the stuff. We start with the big background. 1979 is there. I would say we don't go very deeply into it. I would say that definitely Iran's revolution, even though it's religious, even though it's in its essence related to religion, the way they conduct revolution was very much affected by the classical socialist Marxist approach, in which media is a major point of power that should be get access into. So I think a lot of things that Khomeini, I'm not a very big expert in Iran, I'm the cyber expert there, but it extracts some of the ideas from these Marxist ideas, and then you could see how it follows up. So this sensitivity to media was there all the time, both in the revolution, but then also for keeping the intactment of the revolution, the fact that it's not going to collapse. So we start there, but we don't go very deeply into that. Yeah, I definitely, well, my dream was to find more information about more public Farsi written information. That's the main issue here. So we work according to this material. And in this material, we did not manage to find a lot of materials about neither Hezbollah in Syria or in Lebanon, Syria or Ukraine. I wanted to. I mean, I want to. And if I'll find it, I'll definitely put it in. The only problem is there's a lot of information about that which is written as an outlet of governments. You know, like they go to the public with some of their insights from their intelligence gathering, and we try to break this pattern and address it from internal voice. So in a way, this is changing that in a sense. So we didn't find a lot of information. There is a beginning of some information in Lebanon in Arabic, not Farsi, which is by Hezbollah about the importance of cyber, and hopefully we'll do something with that because we also have some Arabic proficiency here, so we'll attach it. But I'm not sure it's going to be part of this specific paper. Totally agree with the GG Open and the group issue. Yeah, and knowing that you wrote this wonderful paper about Iranians standing in this international multilateral forums, I think that's why we try to put this research, try to create more depth of understanding what is being explored, which is what they do, what they say in English in those multilateral arena. And I totally agree. Yeah, a very good idea to compare the both. If you want to join hands with us and do it, then you're the man, Tal. So just let us know. But I totally agree, and I take a lot from your questions.
Thank you so much, Amit. Yuval, please.
Yes, thank you, Amit. It's very interesting. A little bit. I mean, we have to try to think how it connects to our own specific work. You know, in legal issues, it's you're giving a very broad overview. Tal encouraged you to go back to 1979, but you can go even further back. I mean, the notion of algebra was invented in Persia. Even the word algebra it originates from a mathematician called Al-Jabr. So this is how algebra and algorithms came to. So it all starts in Iran, actually, the whole thing. But more seriously, on the issue of your timeline, I think it is a little bit. I mean, my question or my comment is about how global events actually affect the timeline, because you seem to be very much focused on Iran's specific challenges, the Green Revolution, this revolution, Stuxnet. But the world, I mean, from 2007 onwards, I mean, cyber has become a dominant and increasingly dominant field of national security. So arguably, even if Iran itself wouldn't have been target to these attacks, I mean, it would have developed an interest in the same way that North Korea would have developed an interest. So maybe this is a dimension that you want to say something about how and in the same way that, you know, Iran is interested in drones, when drones became a major part of military technology. So I'm not sure. So it's always tricky to, you know, to do causation in social sciences. But I think here there's an additional layer which needs to be at least acknowledged. So maybe these events could be presented as sort of accelerated developments. But I would argue, I mean, I would imagine that even if they did not occur, we would still see a lot of what we are seeing. So this is a methodological challenge. And indeed, I'm also interested in trying to flesh out which I understand is not your project. Maybe Tal would want to say something about this, the interplay between the challenges specific challenges that Iran is facing and the general approach that it is taking on some of the major issues concerning legal issues such as sovereignty, thresholds for intervention, digital sovereignty. I mean, these sort of issues which are some of the bigger questions in international law governing cyber, and it's not clear where Iran is supposed to be at. I mean, I read Tal's work, and I know what, and I also, I mean, but it's not obvious why are they in the place that they are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. You just reminded me some of the stuff I wanted to say before, and I didn't. So first of all, the cultural background, it's totally there. It should be said. And we also mentioned that in our article, is that we shouldn't be surprised. So if somebody study Iran's culture, knowledgeable of Iran's culture, we shouldn't be surprised that Iran has very good cyber abilities. Also, it's attached to why they have very good nuclear and other abilities, because engineering is almost a cultural imperative in Iran. Okay, so an Iranian mother's dream is you will go study engineer to become an engineer. Most of the Iranian academia, there's hardly any humanities or social studies. Most of it is engineering focused. Okay, there's a lot of know-how, and this is important because.
But who makes the rugs then?
Oh yeah, well, that's also a mathematical puzzle if you ask me. So yeah, exactly. So this is really, there's a cultural imperative to deal with these issues, and hence this is also create knowledge of the threat, as you say, in the world. They're sensitive to that, but also an ability to cope with that, right? To very fast, or this is pretty fast, in less than 20 years, to establish all these institutions to become very good at it, to become a world power in cyber. But I would also say this is not about drones. Okay, so I see that I take this is very different. That's not a technology. It's not just a technology. The way I see cyber, and I think you can see it also by reading in their own words, cyber is opening a new space, a new social political space, an extension of the borders, right? That's also infusing the legal side of it, but also infusing the need to create an institution that will protect this border, to inflict power, to keep the intactment of the state. So it's not just a new technology, but it's a new space that was open there. And I totally agree. So we try to look at the things that we see according to the text are important to our Iranians when they say we need to do something about cyber. So they are sensitive not just to internal stuff, but also to external stuff. But external stuff as the Iraqi war, the second Gulf War, okay? Or the involvement of international powers in the Middle East, in other places, okay? This is how we see the sensitivity there. I think there's a lot to be said in the background of the world changing, these new things coming out. But if you just observe the words, if you read the words, they explicitly talk about Iraq as an incentive. They explicitly talk about, the Green Revolution or other issues are something who cause a lot of stuff. So of course, all these engineers are sensitive to the world, but if I try to use this methodology, yeah, they're aware of global events, but global events that they see as attached to Iranian issues. Okay, so and in a way, hardly any states have the luxury, like the United States, to study the world. Most of them are thinking about the world and how it touches them. And if it doesn't touch them directly, they don't take the resources to study it. But I think that's that we see there. I would definitely think that a lot should be said here about how this infuses the understanding of Iran international standing in the world. I think this is exactly the aim. Okay, this article can be the background of getting to understand what they do in other places and how it actually also makes us understand not just them, but also maybe the Chinese, as I said, because you could see a very parallel approach here, okay, and parallel actions. And at the end, they're also collaborating by pushing ahead international norms and specific proposals in the multilateral, which I'm very aware of. So I think in a way, what I like about this project is that I think that it gives some insight into what is behind the words that are being said in the international arena. But yeah, I totally agree. There's a very big methodological challenge there, trying to talk about this in a chronological manner. And of course, nothing is that organized in the world, but we try to make sense of it for the sake of explaining the argument. So I guess, yeah, you're totally right about that. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Amit. So do we have any other questions or comments? Enzo wants to applaud you as well. Dana, please.
Can I step in? So I have a quick question, but I've missed the first minute. So if you've already mentioned it, I apologize in advance. I was wondering if you explore the relationship between Iran and the big platforms. I know if you know that the recent Facebook Oversight Board decision is concerned about the ability to post death to Khamenei literally, which means stop its regime culturally. So if you have any thoughts of that, or if it's something you've explored,
Thanks. Actually, I think it's a very important question. I mean, I also go to some of the issues written by, the cyber, the Facebook committee who explored some of the allegation that they don't, in regard to the Palestinian and Israel, so they don't evenly show some of the, act. And what I found interesting in connecting to this project is that they put emphasis on the language or their improficiency to be automatically be able to read, I guess, foul comments in other languages like Arabic with a different dialect, kind of stuff. And then hence it caused them to then not, so being prejudiced, like internally being prejudiced against those comments. I think in a way, there's a lot to be said about this connection of social media, Western social media, which is used by non-Western countries with other languages, and taking or thinking that this gap, this cultural, lingual gap, is one of the reasons why there's less even representation of them, or there's a different, so the criticism or taking off some of the posts is not being evenly decided or distributed. And the fact that Facebook is now acknowledging that, also in regard to the Iranian regime, that some of their claims is exactly that. So you don't get us, you're unable to detect whether this is
even though I'm not sure the Iranian regime is happy with their decisions.
Right.
I would guess
the
opposite.
Yeah, I think it can backlash. This is a double-edged sword in a way, but I think this is very interesting because, in a way, this understanding also infuses our research, thinking that maybe we should try to read things in the local languages, and maybe there will be other insights that will help us understand this cyber world. And I think there's more, I would say, sensitivity to that, even by institutions like Facebook. Not the most sensitive and, I don't know, liberal institution in the world, but probably for economical reasons, they understand there's a lot of users who are non-English speakers, and therefore, in order to accommodate their needs, this language kind of like gap is an issue that should be dealt with. So I think this is very interesting.
It's an interesting direction, and the problem occurred in our parts, but also recently in the Russia-Ukraine context, and also in Canada, for example, in protests made by indigenous groups, which were misunderstood.
Right.
And so, for example, in Israel, we have bodies such as the Cyber Department in the Attorney General Office that can be a bridge or a mediator between the population, the users, and Facebook.
There are many Arabs there in the unit. They can help with the authentic translation.
Yeah. So, but again, I don't think that we have a parallel Iranian body which will be eager to serve as a bridge. And
I was thinking there's none to the best of my knowledge.
And I'm actually not sure that our cyber department also use itself as a cultural or lingual bridge. Rather, it has other goals or interests. But it will be good if it will also include it within it. But that now we are moving to another subject, which will probably be Amit's next presentation on on digital platforms.
Yeah.
Multi-stakeholders.
Exactly.
Perfect. Gadi, Florian, you want to raise any issues before we conclude? Perfect. Amit, you want to close the session?
No, I'll just say, as always, it's great to present here because it's such a knowledgeable crowd, and you always get the perspective, which is very insightful and useful. So really thank you for that. Also thank the center for supporting our research group, which now have already produced a few research, I would say groundbreaking research, which was not done before. So that's another platform to say thank you for Yuval and for everybody else who approved this. And yeah, hopefully will be many more.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you so much. So I'll see you next time. We will discuss Daphna Dror's research. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.